Humanity's violent entry into the galactic community. The following is a summary of the events revolving around humanity's initial entry into the galactic community, primarily revolving around their following conflict. With the Homva as written by a German historian, translated to human language and terminology, humanity is as dangerously fascinating as they are fascinatingly dangerous. Coming from a planet in which its very capability to hold life is an anomaly, the humans immediately revealed themselves to be freakishly strong compared to much of the galactic community, much of which originated from planets with a much smaller size and, by proxy, a much weaker gravitational pull and atmosphere. Weather, while not always completely predictable, rarely got too out of hand. Environments would gradually change depending on where on the planet you were. However, they were generally consistent. Hotter tropical climates towards the closest portion of the sun, and colder tundra near the poles. Never had we ever discovered such a bizarre planet as Earth. The fact any life existed above the oceans was amazing in its own right, let alone go on land, and even then managed to develop intelligent life on top of that. However unlikely it was, it did create intelligent life. Humanity, one so used to the relative hellhole it lived on, actively made worse that when put up against just about any other species in the galaxy, it would win almost any time. That was, however, only in strength, ignoring the fact they survive on far less oxygen and can tolerate what is generally deemed harmful chemicals in their lungs far more effectively than most other species can. They wouldn't have been a problem for a species with more advanced technology or intelligence. The galaxy has its share of dumb brutes, strong bulkier races who only manage to thrive due to their sheer strength alone, and in some rare cases, hardly even made it to space, and in another case, only made it this far without side help. These brutes were the strongest in the universe, but their poor intelligence made them easy enough to handle, especially in a large-scale war. Humanity, however, did not have such a limitation. While humanity wasn't quite the most intelligent species, and considering how far behind they seemed to be, they were far from the most advanced. The fact their intelligence ranged from average to just above average was concerning for a race so strong. Putting the strange aspects of humanity aside, such as their use of ancient animal bones for fuel, and their interspecies warlike tendencies, humanity was still isolated to Earth. Earth itself, too, was highly isolated, in a region of the galaxy originally deemed to have little to not chance of life, or at least intelligent life. Humanity likely went through most of its history only speculating whether or not other life existed. Humanity's discovery was in part an accident, in the sense they didn't actually expect to find life where they did. However, on the other hand, the whole point of the mission was to find life. Earth resided in what was referred to as the lifeless cluster, which, while had planets capable of colonization and settlement, seemingly lacked the planets needed to develop life on its own. A survey was sent out to study this region, to see if there was a reason behind that, and if possible, prove that fact wrong. Eventually the ship, a research survey sent out from an independent research organization, began receiving signals, fairly primitive ones, but signals nonetheless, and ultimately decided to hunt down its source. Eventually they found Earth, and as was generally protocol under the Bivy Treaty, which set out rules and guidelines to handling underdeveloped intelligent life. The survey ship took a far-out orbit, circling the planet just short of the orbit of its moon. Itself was fairly large, a member of the survey vessel managing to accidentally correctly predict that it was created upon another planet crashing into Earth. Eventually, they realized the true strangeness and horror behind what humanity had, and what they were capable of if they managed to catch up to the galactic community. Luckily, to their knowledge, humanity had yet to breach its own, every difficult to breach, atmosphere. Unfortunately, as time went on, they eventually noticed something. A satellite, then another, then a third. Eventually, they noticed what they identified as a space station orbiting the planet, with living members of humanity on it. Not only had humanity left their own planet, but they had people residing beyond it, and it only took them a while to notice that their presence had been very much detected before they had even settled into orbit. Humanity began sending them signals. However, due to the panic of what was effectively intended to just be a basic research mission, they left before they had time to translate them. The research team returned, telling all they had learned about humanity, and much of the galactic community began to share the same fears. While protocols of the Bivy Treaty were put in place, albeit exaggerated due to humanity having already extended into space, many within the Galactic Council debated on what to do. On one hand, humanity had just as much right as any other species to rise and join the galactic community. But on the other hand, they feared humanity would grow to be a warmongering nation. Many compared them to the Homva, a species whose culture sought war, who up until they had a greater enemy in the other species in the galaxy to unite against. They decided to satisfy this thirst for war by fighting each other. They feared that humanity was much the same, a bloodthirsty culture seeking war so much that they would divide and fight amongst themselves to satisfy it, only to unify and turn their warlust against the other species in the galaxy. The difference between the Homva and humanity in the Galactic Council's eyes were that, while Homva had been subdued into using diplomacy rather than solely war as a means of negotiating through violence was always their first answer, and much of their diplomacy was intimidation. Humanity, on the other hand, they feared they wouldn't be able to do. Some within the council suggested terminating humanity while they were still young, before they could become a threat. This led to semi-frequent debates among the council as the issue was delayed again and again, until eventually a nation would take it into their own hands. Homva, the nation whose example they used to justify exterminating humanity, had been a vivid supporter of terminating humanity while it was young. Despite of the council's constant delaying of the issue, and never having fully cared for the council's authority, Homva decided to send a grand destroyer with fighter escorts to burn the planet to the ground, and at the very least knock humanity back several generations. These ships would never return. Growing both impatient and worried, Homva decided against holding back, sending a mothership to go exterminate humanity. Motherships were one of the largest ships in any nation's fleet. Many humans would later refer to them as space aircraft carriers. They generally were equivalent in size to moderate-sized cities, and were basically support for and a station for an entire fleet of ships. While the mothership itself could pack a punch, it primarily functions as a portable military base. Homva had one of the highest mothership counts in the galaxy at 7, which due to their size were quite expensive to make and maintain. To send an entire mothership to take out what was a species that had hardly left their own planet was deemed as overkill. And while they could hide their attempt to exterminate humanity back when it was simply 4 ships, they could not hide themselves sending an entire mothership. By the time the council found out, however, the ship was already nearing Earth, this time told to constantly report any information it learns. As the ship approached, it received a single signal from humanity, one which they never bothered translating, but would later be translated to read, "Turn back now." Homva would not heed this warning, however noticed something strange. Despite humanity reportedly having nothing more than satellites the last time they were surveyed, they now had a small fleet of spaceships, albeit crude, guarding themselves. Ultimately, these ships were gradually taken out, though not without inflicting a decent amount of damage and casualties to the Homva fleet. Towards the end of the battle, the mothership would begin sending positive reports, detailing their gradual victories over the much weaker human fleet, eventually detailing, "Humanity's fleet is seemingly in complete tatters. We've calculated well over 70 of their fleet is either completely destroyed or left severely damaged. It would appear that humanity has resorted to utilizing their more primitive rocket technology in suicidal attacks. Our shields are more than capable of withstanding any basic clump of metal trying to slam into it. Victory is assured, preparing to commence the termination process. This was the last signal the mothership would give off. A little over 5 minutes later, they would receive a wave of signals. Some incomprehensible, however most gave off a single, uniform signal. SOZI, or rather, the Homva equivalent. Of all the signals received, only one seemed to give a reason why, reporting, "Mothership destroyed." Attempting retreat, this was an intergalactic embarrassment for Homva, but it was also a terrifying revelation. Humanity somehow had the ability to wipe out an entire mothership in minutes. The exclusion zone was extended further, and the Homva was shunned and crippled diplomatically. For roughly 20 years, that was it, however. No attempts were made to communicate or even go near humanity, and Homva was not about to risk any more motherships trying to take down a mysteriously powerful threat. After those roughly 20 years, however, the border regions of Homva would revive a distress signal, one only received when under attack. Homva Mao mobilized, however, called their forces back, grouping together all 6 of their remaining motherships into a single fleet as they realized the threat. From seemingly nowhere, 3 motherships had emerged. These motherships were crude, bulky, and blocky. And while they were fairly technologically behind, especially in the shielding department, that mattered little, as the ship was easily the most heavily armored of any mothership. A realization struck Homva and the galaxy. Humanity had reverse-engineered their technology, and now they were going on the offensive. The motherships of both nations clashed, the battle lasting an incredibly long time and scaling a vast stretch of area. Up until this day, it is one of the largest battles in galactic history by just the sheer number of ships and motherships alone. Just as before, however, the bulkier and slower human ships, while improved from last time, were slowly being defeated, their bulky armor not to make up for their poor mobility. The motherships too found themselves being notably damaged after a while, however, to humanity. As would later be learned, this was hardly a battle, it was a training exercise. After humanity determined it had enough, 6 rockets launched, 2 from each mothership as 4 hit their targets, engulfing them into the power of the sun, as humanity jokingly refers to it as. 2 rockets were successfully shot down. However, humanity fired again, this time only 1 as shot down, now with only 1 mothership out of their former 7. They attempted to flee, however, in doing so only left themselves vulnerable, and they too were destroyed, with the largest portion of their fleet destroyed in minutes. Humanity flew mostly uncontested in occupying most of Homva's remaining territory. Eventually, they reached the capital, where a new ship named that Apollo Zeros landed on its surface to accept Homva's surrender, upon first taking their steps on the capital. Humanity acted out a homage of sorts to their first landing beyond their home planet before accepting the unconditional surrender of Homva. It was here that many expected Homva to be conquered, their people enslaved, and their planets used as a base for humanity's coming conquests. In truth, however, humanity was highly lenient, seeking no punishment to the nation or the people, rather much more so to its leaders. Upon the surrender of Homva, a broadcast was sent to the Council in numerous languages, including human languages and the languages of all major races in the galaxy. Reading: this message is broadcast on behalf of humanity. We have accepted the total and unconditional surrender of Homva to the United States Space Force on behalf of the United Nations and mankind. We do not seek war. Rather, we seek peace to all those willing to accept us. However, we could not tolerate a deliberate attack and attempt to destroy our own planet. The fate of the nation of Homva is to be determined over the coming weeks. However, its leadership has already been deposed. While we acknowledge we are not signatures of the many intergalactic treaties signed, we have been informed through Homva prisoners of war of the details of said treaties and desire to try the leadership of Homva for violations of these treaties. We fully accept the refusal of this request. However, know if it is refused, we will trial them under the laws and regulations established by human international law. We come in peace though are ready for war. Their request for trial was accepted, primarily as they didn't want to anger the people who had just wiped out 6 motherships in minutes. However, what was generally surprising was how they treated Homva. For one, no land was conquered, while territories taken by Homva were returned to former owners after some negotiations with said former owners. None of their Koi's territory was taken. Their government, however, was adapted and was forged into a democracy. Over time, through interaction with humanity, in particular humanity's investments in rebuilding facilities damaged by the war, the Homva gradually grew out of their warlike culture, with no aggressive government to fuel said aggressive beliefs, and with a friendly partner to trade and interact with. The hostile nature of Homva subsided to only the most racial corners of Homva's political scene. In the years following, humanity proved itself to be a friendly member of the Galactic community, much to the Council's relief, eventually joining the Council as a member state shortly after Earth's unification, albeit one that came about after a war on it. Homva would grow to be one of humanity's closest friends and allies, and humanity eventually decommissioned their secret weapon, referring it to being a weapon which nearly destroyed themselves several times over. Upon digging into human history, most historians believe this weapon to have been the nuclear bombs, a weapon whose methods of how it worked were thoroughly erased from all documentation and their internet, as to erase them for good until someone else invents them most likely. In the end, what was once feared to be a danger to galactic stability ended up being easily one of the friendliest faction in the galaxy, yet at the same time a faction more than willing to take up arms and obliterate any foe that wrongs them or their allies. After a while, many species took a sentence from humanity's first broadcast and began to use it frequently to describe humanity, a people of peace, yet ready for war.